Caught in the middle, civilians on receiving end as DRC conflict rages. Security alert, another round of protests planned after Friday prayers in Egypt. And confirmed victory, Ghanaian president election victory validated. It's 7 p.m. in Eastern Congo, 8 p.m. in East Africa, and this is Africa Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Penina Karibe in Nairobi. There's plenty coming up this hour, including these stories. Deepening ties, China outlines its plans to diversify trade and investment with release of official white paper on China-Africa trade. And causing upsets, Senegal eliminate favourites Nigeria as Cote d'Ivoire riding home support to advance. Now we begin this broadcast in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where United Nations forces are stepping up their assault on Congolese M23 rebels. Ground troops and helicopter gunships have been brought into the battle near the eastern city of Goma. But civilians are also being caught in the crossfire. CCTV's Jean Keo is in Goma, and she filed the following report.
For the past few days, this has been one of the deadliest places in the world. Since fighting flared up around Goma last week, more than a dozen people in the city have been killed by artillery or mortar fire. And on Thursday, more shells landed. Just over the border in Rwanda, people are also dying. In the latest, a shell went off in a nearby marketplace. A young mother was among the victims. It was just behind the border, this man says, right there in Rubavu.
We were seated here when we heard a loud noise. We didn't know where it came from, but people were running from Rwanda, saying it was there.
The effects immediate. Everything grinds to a halt, and troops from the UN's intervention brigade must somehow control the chaos. The M23 rebels are routinely blamed by the Congolese and the UN, but Rwandan authorities also blame the Congolese military. Well, it's still not clear who is behind these cross-border attacks, but they've certainly raised tensions between these two neighboring countries.
This was from Rwanda to Rwanda. Your witnesses. FARDC only bombs Kibati and M23 territory. Why would we kill our civilians? Whoever is bombing Goma is bombing Rwanda.
The UN is trying to calm tensions with Rwanda. Peacekeeping Mission Chief Martin Kobler on Thursday headed to Kigali for talks with the Rwandan government. But for the people here, who is firing the shells is not their main concern. They just want it to stop. Jean Keo, CCTV, Goma, the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, let's take a look at some recent major events which have taken place in Eastern DR Congo. We start with the United Nations Security Council authorizing the creation of the first ever offensive combat force made up of some 3,000 troops on March 28, intended to neutralize and disarm the M23 rebels. Then, on the 30th of July, the UN peacekeeping mission said it was setting up a security zone around Goma, which briefly fell into M23 hands last year and would disarm by force if needed anyone carrying weapons after a 48-hour grace period. On the 22nd of August, fresh fighting raged outside the flashpoint city of Goma, which it's thought killed 2 civilians and wounded dozens more. The M23 rebels and Congolese army blamed each other for the renewed hostilities. Finally, on Wednesday, the 20th of August, the UN confirmed one of its peacekeepers had been killed and 3 others wounded in fighting with M23 rebels near Goma. The M23 rebel movement says it remains committed to a peaceful solution to the conflict, days after DRC forces, backed by a UN brigade, bombarded their positions. Head of the M23's Kampala delegation, Renea Bandi, told journalists the group is ready for a unilateral ceasefire once Kinshasa lays down its weapons. Flanked by M23 spokesperson Amani Kibasha, the rebel group blamed recent deaths in Goma on the Kinshasa administration and the United Nations. The M23 says it will not advance to Goma and is calling on the DRC government to return to negotiations. Renea Bandi accused the DRC government of manipulating the UN to seek war instead of a political solution. The Kampala peace talks stalled after both sides failed to agree on a list of demands before they were sent back for consultations. Among the M23's demands is that it should be integrated into the high ranks of the Congolese army, which Kinshasa does not agree to.
Those innocent people who are dying, while our side is here for peace talks and while the other side is refusing, the other side who is not here is the only responsible of all those deaths. The only thing we are tired with is to declare unilateral ceasefire and to see the other side continuing to bomb and to attack. But at any hour of day or night, if the government accepts, we are ready for a bilateral ceasefire.
Let's now get more from CCTV's Jen Kyo. She joins us live from Goma, Eastern DRC. Jen, what's the latest from the front line? Has the Congolese army managed to prevent the M23 rebel advance towards Goma?
Well, Penina, FRDC appears to have done that so far, even though it's still unclear how much ground they've made in pushing back the rebels, the M23 rebels. We do know the M23 are in Kibati, about 12 kilometers from Goma. Now, FRDC claims to have pushed them back further. How far, we still don't know. M23, of course, claims otherwise. Now, there's a lot of back and forth going on between these two sides, even as the fighting rages on. Again, we still don't have the exact figures or official figures on the casualties, save for the fact that we do know a UN peacekeeper was killed yesterday. Several others were injured. We know that the government side has also bore its fair share of casualties. So there's an air of uncertainty here in Goma as we wait and see what's going to happen next.
All right, Jane, we have to leave it there for now. That's CCTV's Jane Keo live from the Eastern DRC city of Goma. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a break. Coming up. Security alert. Another round of protests planned after Friday prayers in Egypt. And confirmed victory, Ghanaian president election victory validated.
I have a dream to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together.
I have a dream, Black civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. proclaimed 50 years ago in a speech that inspired millions of black Americans in white bondage.
Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
King's decree also fired up Africa's liberation movements. This week, Talk Africa pays homage to Martin Luther King Jr. and poses the question, is Africa living the dream?
Welcome back to North Africa now, where Egypt is bracing for more protests on Friday. Supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi are calling for countrywide demonstrations, but it's not clear just how many people will heed the call. Here's CCTV's Robert Nagila with more details.
It's been billed as the protest of martyrs. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to trigger a nationwide campaign of peaceful civil disobedience. And it's promising the biggest rally since Mohamed Morsi was ousted almost 2 months ago, with protests in the streets and squares of all Egypt's 27 provinces.
Friday is not a decisive day. It is the beginning of a new stage of the peaceful popular resistance. We will go out from all mosques and concentrate our efforts in Cairo.
Recent rallies have fizzled out, largely thanks to a crackdown by security forces. At least 5,000 people have been arrested, including most of the Brotherhood's leadership. But if Friday's protest does draw the numbers, observers say it may succeed in re-energizing the pro-Morsi movement. And perhaps in reaction to this, the interim government appears to be softening its stance on the inclusion of the Brotherhood in Egyptian politics. It, however, says this will largely depend on the action of its supporters. At least 1,000 people have been killed in the crackdown, but security forces retain a lot of support among ordinary Egyptians. And many are confident Friday's protests will also be contained.
I know for the revolution, for changes, can face a lot of problems. So this is a very normal thing happen. We're never going to be like, we cannot compare like the thing happened in Syria or Libya. We never be reached the same level.
Curfew on Friday will begin at 7 p.m. local time instead of 9 p.m. and security forces are expected to again block access to major roads and squares. Robert Magillo, CCTV, Cairo, Egypt.
Egypt's Interior Ministry announced the arrest of Dr. Mohammed al-Beltaghi on Thursday, one of few remaining senior leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. According to security sources, al-Beltaghi was arrested in Giza City, part of Greater Cairo. The announcement comes hours before the Brotherhood supporters launch a new wave of arrests. Al-Beltaghi's son was arrested this week while his daughter died earlier this month. Ahead of the planned Friday protest, there are signs the Brotherhood is softening its position. One official says it would be open to talks about new presidential elections. CCTV's Adel Mahroui now reports.
The press briefing was called to announce another mass protest, another attempt to revitalize popular support behind ousted President Mohammed Morsi. But the briefing also revealed some of Morsi's supporters want to talk to the men who ousted him.
Having early presidential elections is something we can discuss, but not breaking the winnings of the January revolution. We are holding dear to Morsi because he was an outcome of the January 25th revolution.
The interim government has promised new elections by early next year, part of its roadmap back to democracy. Until now, though, the Brotherhood has rejected that. Hanafi says mediation efforts continue, but that the military continues to reject any deal. The Brotherhood also is struggling to find consensus among its leadership. Many of them are in jail.
The leaders cannot communicate well together, but there are members that in one way or another could be reached out for communication.
Hanafi says any deal must include the release of thousands of its members and protection for peaceful protests. In the meantime, its newly founded organization, the Anti-Coup Alliance, will continue demonstrations. The Anti-Coup Alliance, including the Muslim Brotherhood, insists that the resistance will continue. And they now say that the planned protests on August 30th are only the beginning of a new wave of that resistance. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Ghana's Supreme Court has dismissed an appeal which was filed by the opposition seeking to annul President John Mahama's victory in last year's election. Mahama won December's vote with 50.7% of the ballot, but the New Patriotic Party, NPP, had alleged there were malpractices ranging from inflated tallies to the participation of unregistered voters. Most shops in the central Accra were shuttered and the streets were quiet as many Ghanaians watched the verdict at home. Police had sealed off the main streets leading to the court, where helicopters hovered overhead as part of a deployment of 30,000 officers nationwide to counter any violence. Both Mahama and opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo had earlier pledged to accept the ruling and had asked their followers to do the same. Well, so let's take another quick break here on Africa Live. Straight ahead. Cautious approach. The African Union warns against military action in Syria.
make major investments in China.
Why we are leaving for?
That's a fundamental government
position on China's
By leaders.
I think it's for stations we have a dialogue, political change and human rights.
Don't you think
human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
Welcome back. Let's revisit the DRC, where United Nations forces are stepping up their assault on Congolese M23 rebels. Ground troops and helicopter gunships have been brought into the battle near the eastern city of Goma. And of course, civilians are getting caught in the crossfire. Let's get more details now from Nick Harper. He's joining us live from Washington. Nick, it's good to have you with us. Could you please tell us about Rwanda's move to block the UN proposal for sanctions against 2 senior M23 commanders, and what kind of reactions are we getting to that move by Rwanda?
That's right. This is something that was discussed at the UN Security Council. It was a proposal brought by France and the US, a joint proposal from them, to try and bring sanctions against 2 men, the military spokesperson for the M23 rebels and an M23 commander. One of them was accused of executing a man that he thought had been a thief. So they brought this evidence to the UN Security Council. They wanted to impose more sanctions. These people already have a travel ban on them and some of their assets have been frozen, but they wanted to add more sanctions on top of that. However, Rwanda said that it couldn't support that action. It was the only country out of the 15 member states within the Security Council to veto that plan, and they said that their reasons behind it was that they felt the evidence that had been brought by the US and France was very poor, that it wasn't strong enough to make a case for sanctions against the 2 men. They also felt that by adding these sanctions to these 2 M23 people, it would destabilize the region further. It wouldn't help to contribute to any of the peace efforts that are currently ongoing, and it may also ruin the chances of the peace talks in Kigali between the M23 and the Congolese government. So they said that they couldn't support it, and also at the same time they mentioned that they had reports of shelling across the Rwandan border that had killed a couple of people, shelling that they say had been carried out by Congolese troops. So they were very much in opposition to plans for those sanctions.
So Nick, we now have 1 UN peacekeeper dead already in the eastern DRC. Is this perhaps a sign that the UN engagement in the DRC might be a protracted one?
Well, yes, that's always the worry when we see a peacekeeper killed in any conflict. There's a question mark suddenly over how committed the UN will be to keep their force on the ground in that country. However, I must admit it seems to be that the United Nations is particularly committed to the DRC, and they have been for some time, for over a decade. They've got their largest peacekeeping force anywhere in the world in the DRC. It numbers now almost 20,000, and on top of this, they've got this special intervention brigade made up of Tanzanians, Malawians and South Africans, and it was, of course, a Tanzanian from this intervention brigade who was killed, another 3 Tanzanians wounded and 2 South Africans wounded as well. So there does seem to be this commitment from the United Nations. I wouldn't think that it would mean that they will now try and pull out troops or scale back what they're trying to do. And in fact, we've heard from the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. He said that he condemned the killing of the Tanzanian soldier. He passed on his condolences, but at the same time, he reiterated the United Nations commitment to the DRC, to this eastern part of the country where the fighting has been ongoing. And it seems that the mission there to take on the M23 rebels will very much continue despite, unfortunately, this killing.
All right, Nick Harper, live for us in Washington. Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Now let's go to Ethiopia, where the African Union has taken a position on the ongoing crisis in Syria. The Syrian government has denied it is behind a suspected chemical attack near the capital Damascus on the 21st of August, in which hundreds of people are reported to have died. It instead blames opposition forces. This has prompted an external military intervention debate, something the EU says it's opposed to. Our correspondent Grim Chala brings us more details about the AU's reaction from Addis Ababa.
The African Union says now is not the time for military action in Syria. The AU has condemned the use of chemical weapons and says it is saddened by the death of civilians. But is also calling for more talks with Damascus and says the UN's investigating team on the use of chemical weapons must be given time to report. Now, the AU was fiercely opposed to the airstrikes on Libya. So many members remain wary of any Western military intervention with or without a UN resolution. But several African Union members also are members of the Arab League, and it released a particularly strong statement on Tuesday calling for the UN Security Council to act. Grumjala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In a related development, the South African government has opposed the military action in Syria. It is calling on both sides in the Middle East country to negotiate to solve the escalating crisis. CCTV's Guy Henderson has more details.
Now, the South African government has condemned the use of chemical weapons in Syria, but it has stressed that it wants UN weapons inspectors to be able to complete their work first and foremost, and that when they have, it should be the UN primarily that decides what action may be taken next. Officials here, though, have already said that they are not in favour of military action. They say that that will only increase the suffering of the Syrian people. They are calling for a resumption of dialogue, a resumption of those peace talks, and that, of course, is something they've called for all along, very much drawing on their own experience and their own path towards peace here in South Africa. Now, one man that played a very prominent role in that path towards peace in South Africa, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, has also spoken out on this issue, saying that he believes that any military action inside Syria is likely to be too risky and essentially counterproductive. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Meanwhile, China says there should be no rush to prejudge the findings of a UN inspection team. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi repeated that China opposed anyone using chemical weapons, but said military action would not help. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy in Syria has made full preparations to guarantee the safety of the Chinese people in the country. The Chinese ambassador to Syria, Chang Xun, has released details of the planned measures amid the threats of Western military strikes on Syria.
In addition to the embassy staff, there's still 30 Chinese in Syria. These people include the overseas Chinese, students, workers in Chinese invested firms, and journalists. The embassy is watching current situation closely and keeping in constant contact with the Chinese people in Syria. We have urged them to evacuate as soon as possible. Vehicles and evacuating routes have been prepared. We also keep in touch with nearby embassies. We will do our best to ensure a safe evacuation for the people if any emergency happens.
To Uganda now, and authorities in Kampala are making a fresh attempt to rein in the capital's notorious motorcycle taxis. Known as boda bodas, they're the quickest and cheapest way to get through the clogged city. But all too often, journeys from A to B end in hospital. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has more.
Few would choose to get around the city this way, but more and more Ugandans are forced to.
They are effective when it comes to movement. We'll get you there on time.
For boda boda rider Stephen Baguma, he says this sort of maneuver is the only way his passenger will get to his destination on time. Baguma is something of a veteran. He's done this for 5 years and supports his family.
I started by riding someone's bike, but now I own one. My children go to school and they look good. I look good too.
Baguma is among more than 200,000 boda boda riders thought to operate in Kampala. few motorists are fans.
You drive this way, he's overtaking at the same spot. You stop, he's at your bumper. He knocks you and instead insults you. They do not have discipline.
But boda riders provide a vital service. Like many African cities, Kampala's roads are old and feeling the strain of heavy traffic. Beating traffic jam becomes easy, especially during rush hours, but the risk of accidents associated with the bikes is high, according to police statistics. Kampala's main hospital deals with an average of 20 cases involving boda accidents every day. City authorities want all boda riders to register. Police are also calling for better training.
You are supposed to undergo thorough riding course. After the riding course, you are supposed to come to us as police and we test you. After testing you, then we give you a rider's permit. But most of the bodas don't have rider's permit.
Still, authorities are determined to try. New rules stipulate only one passenger can be carried at a time, and both rider and passenger must wear helmets. They are promising stiff penalties for anyone caught breaking the rules. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
Rwanda is perhaps one of those countries that has quite a success story when it comes to those borders, Rama.
Indeed, but Kampala is absolutely notorious for its traffic jams. It's impossible to move there in rush hour. Well, you don't understand why the bikes are there, but still, it's an absolute mess. That said, here's what's coming up on Biz Africa tonight.